The landmark decision in Brown v. Board of Education of 1954 shattered the legal framework of racial segregation in public schools while asserting the government's responsibility to ensure equal protection under the law. This case catalyzed the civil rights movement, illustrating the vital connection between individual rights and societal responsibilities in the ongoing pursuit of justice and equality in America. After the Civil War, a significant period known as Reconstruction unfolded from 1865 to 1877. The 13th Amendment was ratified in 1865, officially ending slavery. In 1868, the 14th Amendment was introduced, ensuring that all citizens had equal protection under the law. The 15th Amendment followed in 1870, granted African American men the right to vote. However, even with these important constitutional improvements, many Southern states implemented black codes and later Jim Crow laws aimed at enforcing racial segregation and restricting the rights of African American citizens. The late 19th century to the early 20th century marked a dark time in American history with the establishment of Jim Crow laws that enforced racial segregation in the Southern states. The infamous 1896 Supreme Court case, Plessy v. Ferguson, played a pivotal role by bringing the separate but equal doctrine into the legal framework. In the early 20th century, the phrase separate but equal was used to justify racial segregation in America. It became a part of the country's legal and social fabric even after the end of slavery. But this idea, meant to placate those advocating for black rights, was a lie. The doctrine allowed for African Americans to be systematically segregated in schools, public spaces, and other parts of daily life. Despite its promise of equality, separate but equal perpetuated deep inequalities, particularly in public education. The seeds of the Brown case were planted in 1951 when Oliver Brown, a father in Topeka, Kansas, sued the local school board because his daughter, Linda Brown, was forced to attend a segregated black school rather than a nearby white school. Brown's case was joined with similar cases from Delaware, South Carolina, Virginia, and Washington, D.C., all challenging the constitutionality of school segregation. The case, originally brought to trial in Kansas, was eventually heard by the Supreme Court. At the helm of the legal case was Thurgood Marshall, a brilliant attorney from the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or NAACP, who had already won several landmark cases against segregation. Marshall and his team argued that segregation in public schools violated the 14th Amendment's guarantee of equal protection under the law. Marshall's team focused on the inherent inequality of segregated schools, presenting evidence that segregation harmed black children psychologically, instilling feelings of inferiority that could last a lifetime. The Brown case reached the Supreme Court in 1952. The plaintiffs, represented by Thurgood Marshall and the NAACP, argued that segregation in public schools violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. They demonstrated that the separate but equal doctrine was inherently flawed and the segregated schools were not, in fact, equal. In addition to legal arguments, Marshall's team presented powerful social science evidence, including the influential Clark-Doll test. Psychologists Kenneth and Mamie Clark conducted experiments where black children were asked to choose between a black doll and a white doll. The majority of children chose the white doll, revealing a disturbing internalized racism and confirming that segregation was psychologically harmful to African American children. This evidence played a critical role in helping the court understand the deep and lasting effects of racial segregation. On May 17, 1954, the Supreme Court delivered its unanimous decision. Chief Justice Earl Warren wrote the opinion, declaring that separate educational facilities are inherently unequal. The court's ruling emphasized that segregation created a sense of inferiority among African American children, and thus, segregation itself was damaging to both the individuals it targeted and to society as a whole. However, the ruling did not immediately end segregation in schools. The decision called for schools to be integrated with all deliberate speed, but it left the implementation up to local governments.
That the best we could look for would be a progression of action, and to keep it going in a proper manner, we adopted that phrase, all deliberate speed.
The Brown versus Board of Education ruling was met with varied reactions across different segments of American society. For white Southerners, the decision was seen as an unwelcome intrusion by the federal government into what they considered their right to maintain their own social order. Many Southern leaders, including Governor Orville Faubus of Arkansas, resisted the decision. Faubus famously used the National Guard to block the Little Rock nine African-American students from entering Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas in 1957. For the legal community, Brown was a monumental case that shifted the course of the American constitutional law. Thurgood Marshall's team successfully argued that segregation violated the principles of equality embedded in the 14th Amendment, and the court agreed. The decision marked the beginning of the dismantling of legalized segregation, and it provided a legal foundation for future civil rights cases. For students, the ruling was a moment of hope but also fear. African American students, especially in the South, were excited about the possibility of receiving an education equal to that of their white peers. But they were also afraid of the hostility they might face. The Little Rock Nine endured physical and verbal abuse from their white classmates and had to be escorted by federal troops to attend school. Some white students became allies, but for others, attending school with African American students was a deeply uncomfortable experience. Over the long term, Brown versus Board of Education played a pivotal role in dismantling racial segregation in U.S. schools despite significant resistance in the immediate aftermath. The decision set a legal precedent that forced changes in the education system, ultimately leading to greater integration in public schools by the 1970s. However, the ruling's impact extended beyond schools. It catalyzed the broader civil rights movement, encouraging activists to push for sweeping legal reforms, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. In addition to its immediate effects, Brown set critical legal precedents that shaped future civil rights cases. By establishing that separate is inherently unequal, the ruling solidified the principle of equality, which influenced future Supreme Court decisions regarding voting rights, employment discrimination, and more. It also inspired other minority groups, providing a model for challenging inequality and influencing movements for women's rights, LGBTQ rights, and immigrant rights. While the decision laid the groundwork for these advancements, it also sparked significant resistance, particularly in some regions. Over time, integration fostered more diverse classrooms and communities, promoting cultural exchange and mutual understanding. The cultural and political changes brought about by Brown versus Board of Education continue to influence debates on affirmative action, education policies, and social justice, highlighting its lasting impact on American society. The legacy of Brown versus Board of Education serves as a powerful reminder that the struggle for racial equality continues, and the work that began in 1954 is still an ongoing effort for justice in education and beyond. This decision sparked the rights of African American citizens and the responsibilities of the courts and society. The case emphasizes that rights must be accompanied by action. While the courts took a monumental step in 1954, society as a whole shared the responsibility to create and maintain equitable educational environments. This meant not only advocating for policies that support equal access to quality education, but also addressing the disparities that disproportionately affected diverse communities. The ripples of Brown versus Board of Education extended beyond schools, influencing legislation and societal attitudes towards race in America. While the road to full integration and equality remains a continuous struggle, the case established a crucial recognition that the pursuit of justice is both an individual and collective responsibility. The legacy of Brown serves as a reminder of the power of the law to effect change, the enduring impact of education on shaping society, and the persistent need for advocacy in the face of inequality and injustice.